My husband's siblings stood on my porch, laughing as they handed me a fake eviction notice for the house I had owned for 30 years. They called me a useless housewife, completely unaware that the woman they were mocking was actually a decorated 4-star general with a battalion on speed dial. I stared at the paper in my hand. It was a cheap forgery, the kind of thing you can download off a shady legal template site, filled in with a ballpoint pen that had smudged near the date. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the ink even further, matching the gray, miserable afternoon that marked exactly 1 week since we put Mark in the ground. "Well, don't just stand there gaping like a fish, Sandra," Brenda sneered, clutching her faux fur coat tighter around her neck. She had the kind of face that was permanently etched with dissatisfaction, a roadmap of petty grievances. "Pack your bags. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. The family trust is reclaiming the asset." Gary, her younger brother, leaned against the porch railing, picking his teeth with a plastic flosser. He looked like a used car salesman who had fallen on hard times, which was accurate considering he was a used car salesman who had recently been audited. "It's over, Sandy. The free ride is done. Mark's gone and he didn't leave this place to you. It's Higgins family property." I looked from the paper to them. My hands weren't shaking from fear, though they probably thought so. They were shaking from a rage so cold and calculated it felt like ice water in my veins. "This house is in my name," I said, my voice quiet. "Mark and I bought it in '92. The deed is in the safe." "Mark bought it," Brenda corrected sharply. You never worked a day in your life. You were just the little woman at home baking cookies and spending his money while he built an empire. You think we don't know? You think we don't see you for what you are? A leech." Gary chuckled. "A parasite. That's the word, Bren. A parasite. Look, Sandra, we're being generous giving you 24 hours. We could have the sheriff here right now to toss you and your knitting needles onto the curb." They had no idea. For 35 years, I had maintained a cover so boring, so utterly mundane that it acted as the perfect camouflage. To the Higgins family, I was Sandra the homemaker. I was the woman who missed Thanksgiving because of migraines. I was the woman who disappeared for months at a time to care for a sick aunt in Nebraska. I was the quiet wife who nodded politely while they bragged about their mediocre achievements. They didn't know that migraine was a black ops extraction in the Sudan. They didn't know the sick aunt was a geopolitical crisis in Eastern Europe that required my direct oversight on the ground. They didn't know that while Mark was designing skyscrapers, he was a brilliant architect and the only civilian who knew the truth. I was directing intelligence operations that shaped national security policy. I was General Sandra Higgins. I had retired 6 months ago to nurse Mark through his final battle with pancreatic cancer. I had commanded thousands. I had been in rooms where the fate of nations was decided over stale coffee. And these two suburban vultures thought they could bully me out of my home with a PDF they printed at Kinko's? "I'm not leaving," I said, folding the paper neatly and placing it in my cardigan pocket. Brenda stepped forward, invading my personal space. She smelled of cheap Chardonnay and desperation. "Listen to me, you old bat. You have no money, you have no job, you have no friends. You are nothing without my brother. We are taking this house, we are taking the cars, we are taking everything. If you make this difficult, I will make sure you end up in a state-run nursing home rotting in your own filth." I looked her in the eye. For a brief second, the mask slipped. I let her see the steel behind the hazel irises, the look that had made hardened interrogators swallow hard. Brenda blinked, stepping back slightly, confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere, though she was too dense to understand why. "Get off my porch," I said. "We'll be back tomorrow at noon," Gary shouted as they retreated to his rusting sedan. "With the police! Better start packing, Sandra!" I watched them drive away, their taillights fading into the gloom. I stood there for a long time, listening to the rain hit the roof of the home Mark and I had built together. It was a farmhouse we had renovated with our own hands, or rather, on the weekends I was actually home. It was my sanctuary. It was the one place where I didn't have to be the general. But Mark was gone, and the sanctuary had been breached. I turned, walked inside, and locked the door. I didn't go to the kitchen to bake cookies. I went to the study, pulled the Persian rug aside, and unlocked the floor safe. Inside wasn't just the deed to the house. There was a secure satellite phone, a Glock 19, and a hard drive containing encrypted files that were, strictly speaking, supposed to have been destroyed upon my retirement. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in half a year. "Secure line," a gravelly voice answered on the first ring. "Viper," I said. "This is Archangel. I need a sit rep on 2 targets. Domestic." There was a pause, then a warmth entered the voice. "General Higgins, my condolences on Mark. I was sorry to hear about it." "Thank you, Mike. I'm grieving, but unfortunately I'm being interrupted." "Who's dumb enough to poke the bear?" Colonel Mike Viper Davidson asked. He was currently active duty at the Pentagon, a man I had trained when he was a green lieutenant. He owed me his career and, arguably, his life. "My in-laws, Brenda Miller and Gary Higgins. They just tried to serve me a fraudulent eviction notice. They think I'm a destitute widow. They plan to return tomorrow at 1200 hours to seize the property." "Do you want me to send a squad to scare them off?" "No," I said, looking at the framed photo of Mark on the desk. He was laughing in the picture, holding a fish. He hated his siblings. He tolerated them for his mother's sake, but he knew they were sharks. He would have found this hilarious. "I don't want to scare them off, Mike. I want to obliterate them, legally, financially, and socially. I want a full dossier. Bank accounts, tax returns, outstanding debts, legal history. I want to know what they ate for breakfast and who they owe money to. And I need it by 0800 tomorrow." "Consider it done, General. Anything else?" "Yes. I'm going to need a few of the boys for a detail tomorrow. Dress blues. And get me a JAG lawyer who specializes in estate fraud. I'll have Captain Evans on a plane in an hour. He's the best shark in the water." "Good. Out." I hung up the phone. The sadness was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but now it had company. Adrenaline. It was a familiar friend. I spent the rest of the night not crying, but planning. I went through my own files. I found the real deed, the trust documents Mark had meticulously set up to ensure I was protected, and the bank statements showing that, actually, I had paid for the renovations, not Mark. My salary as a 4-star general was public record if anyone cared to look, but Brenda and Gary had never looked. They saw what they wanted to see, a woman who stayed home. They assumed Mark paid for everything because Mark was loud and gregarious. I was quiet. In their misogynistic worldview, the quiet woman was the dependent one. They didn't realize that the quiet woman was the one earning hazard pay and commanding a budget in the billions. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and cold. At 0800 sharp, my secure printer hummed to life. I poured a cup of black coffee and watched the pages spit out. Mike didn't disappoint. I picked up Brenda's file first. It was a masterpiece of suburban corruption. Brenda was the treasurer for her local homeowners association. It appeared she had been siphoning funds to pay for her boutique clothing business, which was actually a pyramid scheme. That was grand larceny. She also had 3 maxed-out credit cards in her husband's name that he likely didn't know about, and, this was the cherry on top, she was claiming her mother, my late mother-in-law, as a dependent on her taxes for 3 years after the woman had died. Tax fraud. I moved to Gary. Gary was simpler, but messier. Gambling debts. Massive ones. He owed money to some very unsavory characters in Atlantic City. He had taken out a second mortgage on his house by forging his wife's signature. His car dealership was currently under investigation for rolling back odometers. And then there was the legal angle. I looked into the eviction notice. The lawyer listed on the letterhead was a man named Kevin O'Shea. I ran his name through the database Mike provided. Disbarred 3 years ago for trust fund embezzlement. He was Gary's drinking buddy. They weren't just greedy. They were criminals. And they were stupid. They were trying to steal a house to pay off debts that were about to drown them. At 11 a.m., a black SUV rolled up my long driveway. Captain Evans stepped out. He was tall, sharp, and looked like he was carved out of granite. He carried a briefcase. "General," he said, snapping a salute as I opened the door. "At ease, Captain. Coffee?" "Please, ma'am." We sat in the kitchen. I briefed him on the situation. He looked over the fake eviction notice and actually laughed. "This is pathetic, General. I could have this thrown out in small claims court. But with the fraud you've uncovered, we're looking at federal prison time for the tax evasion and wire fraud." "I know," I said, "but I want them to know who did it. I want them to know who I am." "Understood." At 11:30 a.m., 2 more vehicles arrived. These were not SUVs. They were troop transport vans. 12 men and women in full-dress uniforms spilled out. They weren't just random soldiers. They were my former personal security detail and members of the intelligence unit I had commanded. They had taken leave to be here. Sergeant Major Lewis, a man the size of a vending machine with a heart of gold, walked up the steps. "Heard you had a pest control problem, General?" I smiled, genuinely, for the first time in a week. "Just a few rats, Lewis. Come inside. I want you all out of sight until I give the signal." The plan was simple. The ambush. At 11:55 a.m., I saw them coming. It wasn't just Brenda and Gary this time. It was a cavalcade. Brenda, Gary, Gary's wife, who looked terrified, and the disbarred lawyer, Kevin. They also had a man in a rent-a-cop uniform who I assumed was supposed to intimidate me. They parked on the lawn. Not the driveway, the lawn. Mark loved that grass. He spent hours mowing it. That small act of disrespect fueled my fire more than the insults. I sat on the porch swing, wearing a floral housecoat and slippers. I looked every bit the defeated widow. I had Captain Evans hide in the kitchen. The unit was in the basement and the garage. Brenda marched up the steps, triumph radiating off her. "Time's up, Sandra. Did you pack your bags?" Gary was grinning. "We brought the sheriff, just in case you wanted to get feisty." He gestured to the rent-a-cop, whose badge clearly said private security in small letters. I don't have anywhere to go," I stammered, clutching a tissue. "Not our problem," Brenda spat. "Kevin, show her the deed transfer." The disbarred lawyer stepped forward, thrusting a clipboard at me. "Mrs. Higgins, if you sign this quitclaim deed now, the family is willing to give you a cash stipend of $5,000 to help you relocate. If you don't, the sheriff here removes you by force and you get nothing." I took the clipboard. 5,000? "It's more than you deserve," Gary said. "You leeched off Mark for 30 years. You're lucky we're giving you bus fare." "Mark told me the house was ours," I whispered. "Mark lied to protect your feelings," Brenda said cruelly. "He knew you were useless. He complained about it all the time. 'Sandra just sits there,' he'd say. 'Sandra doesn't contribute.' He was planning to divorce you, you know. He told me on his deathbed he wanted the house to go to the real family." That was the line. The lie. Mark had died holding my hand, whispering that I was the strongest thing in his life. He had died knowing exactly who I was. I looked down at the clipboard. "I need to get my glasses," I said softly. "Hurry up," Brenda snapped. I stood up and walked into the house. I left the front door open. Inside, I shed the floral housecoat. Underneath, I was wearing my Class A dress uniform. The dark blue jacket was tailored to perfection. 4 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder. Rows of ribbons covered my chest. Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star with V device. The weight of it felt like armor. I put on my service cap. I checked my reflection. The weeping widow was gone. The general was present. I signaled Captain Evans. He stepped out of the kitchen, looking immaculate in his JAG uniform. I walked back to the porch. The sound of my heels on the hardwood was different now. Authoritative. Sharp. Brenda was busy typing on her phone. Gary was laughing with the fake cop. They didn't look up until I was standing in the doorway. "Did you find your—" Brenda started, looking up. The words died in her throat. Silence descended on the porch. It was absolute, the kind of silence that happens when a bomb drops but hasn't detonated yet. Gary's jaw literally dropped. He squinted, trying to process the image. The ribbons, the stars, the sheer presence. "What is this?" Brenda whispered. "Is this a costume? Are you crazy?" "Attention!" I barked. The command came from the diaphragm, a voice honed on parade grounds and in command centers. From the garage and the side of the house, my unit emerged. 12 soldiers, moving with fluid, terrifying precision. They flanked the porch, weapons not drawn but clearly present in their holsters, MP duty belts. They stood at rigid attention, eyes forward. Sergeant Major Lewis stepped onto the porch and saluted me. "Perimeter secure, General Higgins." I returned the salute crisply. "Thank you, Sergeant Major." I turned my gaze to my in-laws. They looked like they were hallucinating. The rent-a-cop took one look at the real soldiers, turned pale, and slowly started backing away toward his car. "Stay right there," I ordered the guard without looking at him. He froze. "General?" Gary squeaked. What is going on? Sandra?" "That is General Higgins to you," Captain Evans said, stepping out beside me. "And I am Captain Evans, Judge Advocate General's Corps. You are currently trespassing on federal property." "Federal property?" Kevin the lawyer stammered. "This is a private residence." "It is the residence of a retired 4-star general," Evans said calmly, "and attempting to defraud a service member is a felony. Attempting to use a fraudulent court order is a felony. Impersonating a law enforcement officer," he pointed at the rent-a-cop, "is a felony." I stepped forward. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. "You called me useless," I said, my voice steady. "You called me a leech. You stood in my home, drank my husband's liquor, and insulted his memory with your greed. You thought because I didn't brag, I didn't exist. You mistook my silence for weakness." Brenda was shaking. We didn't know. Mark never said." "Mark respected his non-disclosure agreements," I said, "something you know nothing about. I have spent 30 years hunting down terrorists, dismantling cartels, and protecting this country from threats that would make you wet your pants, Brenda. Do you really think I can't handle a PTA treasurer who embezzles funds?" Brenda's face went white. "What?" I pulled the dossier from under my arm. I dropped it on the porch railing with a heavy thud. "Page 1, I said, "the HOA funds. Page 3, the tax fraud regarding your mother. Page 10, the pyramid scheme." I turned to Gary. "And you? The odometer rollbacks? With sharks in Atlantic City? Did you really think you could steal my house to pay them off?" Gary looked like he was going to vomit. "Sandra, please, we're family." "No," I said coldly. "Mark was my family. You are hostiles." I nodded to Captain Evans. "Explain their situation." Evans opened his briefcase. "I have already contacted the FBI regarding the wire fraud and the IRS regarding the tax evasion. Local PD is on their way for the trespassing and the forgery. Mr. O'Shea, he looked at the fake lawyer, since you are practicing without a license and forging court documents, I imagine you'll be looking at 5 to 10 years. Kevin bolted. He actually tried to run. Sergeant Major Lewis didn't even run. He just stepped into the path and extended an arm. Kevin ran into him like a bird hitting a windshield and collapsed to the grass. "Sandra, please!" Brenda was crying now, ugly, terrified sobs. "We can fix this. We'll leave. We'll never come back." "You're right about the second part," I said. "You see, in my line of work, we don't leave enemies behind to regroup. We neutralize the threat." Blue lights flashed at the end of the driveway. The real police were here. "I have compiled all the evidence of your financial crimes," I continued. "I have handed it over to the district attorney. I have also contacted the creditors you owe money to, Gary, and informed them of your current assets, or lack thereof. I imagine they'll be very interested in the lien on your house." "You ruined us," Brenda hissed, her fear turning back to venom as the police officers walked up the driveway. "You evil witch!" I leaned in close, so only she could hear me. "I'm not evil, Brenda. I'm tactical. There's a difference." I watched from the porch as the police handcuffed them. The officer in charge, a man I knew from town, looked confused by the soldiers but tipped his hat when he saw my uniform. "General Higgins," he said. "We got a call about trespassers and fraud?" "Take them away, Chief," I said, "and make sure to get the fake lawyer off the grass. He's crushing the clover." As they were shoved into the back of the police cruisers, screaming obscenities and pleas for mercy, Gary looked back at me one last time. He looked at the uniform, the house, the soldiers. He looked at the woman he had underestimated for decades. "Who are you?" he mouthed. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The cruisers drove away. The silence of the countryside returned. My unit relaxed. "Sit rep, General," Lewis asked, smiling. "Threat neutralized," I said. "Good work, everyone. Who wants lunch? I believe there's a brisket in the smoker." We spent the afternoon on the porch, eating brisket and telling war stories. For the first time since Mark died, the house didn't feel empty. It felt secure. The aftermath was exactly as calculated. Brenda went to prison for 3 years for embezzlement and tax fraud. Her husband divorced her while she was inside, finally figuring out where all his money had gone. She lost her house to pay restitution to the HOA. Gary avoided prison by flipping on his partners in the odometer scam, but he lost his dealership and his license. The Sharks from Atlantic City took his house and his car. He now lives in a studio apartment and works at a car wash. The lawyer, Kevin, is serving 8 years. It turns out I wasn't the first widow he'd tried to scam. I was just the first one who could call in an airstrike, metaphorically speaking. I still live in the farmhouse. I still bake cookies. I still tend to Mark's garden. But the town treats me differently now. The rumors spread, as they always do. They don't know the specifics, the files are still classified, but they know not to mess with the widow Higgins. Sometimes I go to Mark's grave. I sit there and talk to him. "You were right," I told him last week, placing fresh flowers on the stone. "You always said they'd hang themselves if you gave them enough rope. I just provided the rope." I traced the letters of his name. "I miss you, Mark. But don't worry about me. I'm holding the line." I stood up, brushed the grass off my knees, and walked back to my car. I had a meeting with the Joint Chiefs on Tuesday, consulting work, of course, and I needed to iron my uniform. The useless housewife had work to do.